Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and thank you for stopping by once again. I have a number of things I want to cover today. Sort of a cleanup day. There are a few things I want to clarify that I've said in the past, a couple of extra pieces of information here or there, a couple questions answered and so forth and what have you, and some links and maybe a download or two that you might find interesting to read or to check out. With that in mind, let's get right to it because I quite a few here, and I'll get through as many as I can today. One of those is in the last video, which had to do with, is all of Panama a buyer's market, and the answer being no, and some explanation of the story there. One factor I left out, which I shouldn't, because it affects a fairly sizable number of you, and that is, of course, the strength of the U.S. dollar. For those of you in Canada and Europe and so on, a number of currencies, this makes the market here much more expensive because the dollar's been so strong. Here is, let me put up here, here we've got the chart of the DXY, that's the dollar index, and it goes back 10 years. This is about as long as you want it to go back because you don't want to get too involved with the housing collapse and the disaster following that. It just distorts everything. But in any event, you will see that it was down around 80 on this index. Now that's pretty much the bottom of where the DXY normally trades. It can go down into the 70s, and it has. Still, that's pretty much where it considered the bottom of its range. Then you see it suddenly moves up. Once the various and sundry financial crises, or the old one, is over and we're getting into a whole new territory, things have changed. The point is, I'm not going to go into all the details of what happened there, but you can see that it is at much higher levels, and it's remained there. Anything over 95 is really pretty good. It is good. Anything up to 100 is very, very good, and if you get over 100, you really got a strong dollar, and that's exactly where we have been most recently, and have been on several occasions. So, generally speaking, this is the kiss of death for people who don't have dollars, and they come in and they want to buy a house here, and suddenly it just costs them more than they had anticipated. So for them, it may still be a buyer's market, because the difference may not be all that great. But it won't be as good a buyer's market, and for some it may conceivably be an even worse market than it had been in the past. I doubt it's that serious, but it's possible. I don't know. You know your own currency well enough to. But I wanted to at least say I understand that, and there's nothing I can do about it or anybody else can do about it. This has been going on for some years now, and it will eventually change and so forth and what have you. But it's not been easy for people without dollars. Now, another factor that has also influenced things, I might just mention in passing, is the loss of the Friendly Nations visa. Long story short, this visa was good for 200, 300, 400 people every month, year after year after year, getting visas. Remember, they don't do it every month. They get it once, and they have it for a decade. So we're adding on a few hundred people every month. April of this year, 67. So the whole new visa for the Friendly Nation is not very friendly, and it's adding very few people to the total here. It's a sad story. I was going to show May's, and it should be out, but probably I've been waiting for it, but I'm not going to wait any longer. It'll come out next week. It probably is not going to be a dramatic increase because February and March weren't very good either. Now, as for things that I need to update you on, but I've said not long ago, one I'd mentioned to you that cryptocurrencies legislation had been developed. It appeared to have been developed in league with a whole variety of different people who were concerned with it. It had passed through what I call 3 readings in the national legislature and was now up to the president to decide whether or not to sign it. And I was pleased because it appeared that everybody had gotten their 2 cents in as to what they thought the law should state and how it should be operated. Not so fast. It turns out that the banking community is not yet convinced that this is something that is a wise idea. Neither is the president, so he has simply put it on hold. No decision has been made. It may get thrown back to them for reconsideration. But folks, What's been going on in cryptocurrencies in recent days, as you can imagine, has had an impact. I have no doubt. No one mentions a word about the collapse in the value of cryptocurrencies, the Bitcoin and what have you. But come on, let's face it, this is a business country. I said we're not El Salvador. We're not looking to gamble on it. We need to be convinced that this is something really worth our time. We would love to have this other alternative. No one's opposed to the concept. It's just got to work. And if it doesn't, we can't have our money put into something like that. And we're not unusual in that regard. So consider us old-fashioned, if you like. But that's the way we are, and that's the way we'll stay. So that's on hold. It's not over. It's just something's got to get worked out here. Now, an error that I made, I tell you, this pandemic has managed to get my memory all messed up. The last one, I talked about ports. And I said there's 6 ports and that are container ports, the major ports, that are located here in the nation. And the 7th one had just been added. And I talked about it's a Swiss-based firm owned by an Italian family, and so on and so on and so on. And I thought, at the time, I should have realized something was wrong. I thought, just a minute, that means there'll be 5 of them on the Caribbean coast. That seems like a bit much. Anyhow, something seemed wrong. But I couldn't really think of a thing, and I went to my list of ports, and there were 6 stared in front of me, and the 7th one would make 7. And it turns out the list was not quite up to date. Well, they changed it, but they made a note, and I didn't even see it. There was no way to see it. It was really ridiculous. So in the event, what happened is that there are 6 ports now. There were 6 ports before. But one of those had its contract canceled. And this new one is replacing it. Now, the interesting story here is for some people who get everything into politics, people do. It was back, I think it was 2017, when this Chinese firm who had gotten this contract, concessionary contract for a 25-year period or whatever, there was some to do and some websites of the fact that they now owned the port, which of course is not true. They have a concessionary contract for 25 years. They have to follow certain goals. They have to meet those goals. The mileposts have to be met. They have to spend money. It's their money that goes into a whole variety of things going. It's a contract, guys. It's a contract, not ownership. And anyhow, that was the case. And they showed this really active port, some photos. Those were not the port in question. It hadn't been built yet. Anyway, I'm looking at all this stuff saying, oh, good Lord, here we go. Well, here's the fact, is that, yes, indeed, they did, and it was a Chinese firm, and it failed. Questions were raised about it wasn't doing its job, and it was clear. So a formal audit was done, and it was found that it just simply had not met its goals and the mileposts and the contract. It had violated the contract at several different levels. The contract was canceled. That was 2019. As you know, after that, we get into pandemic time. And Bob's sitting here forgetting the fact that that particular contract had been canceled. We don't sit around and worry about these things. They happen. We take, they happen. It's not a big news here in quite the same way as it might be in some countries. And I sat there and thought, oh, good Lord. So that's why there are only 6, not 7 this time around. But that's also a reminder that it isn't something you get to do anything you want to do once you get a concessionary contract. You just have to follow the rules, and if you don't, it gets taken away. All right. And one thing I noticed here, there was legislation in 2007 that really made it much easier for international companies to come in to Panama and set up regional operations as well as regional headquarters and all sorts of things like that. They had to be multinational. They had to reach a certain income levels. They're not little tiny companies. They're fairly sizable. And they had to follow certain rules and all that. If they did, they could have a higher percentage of foreign personnel than other companies because they were bringing in people that they could not find in the local market. And they got special office and visa considerations. So there are people they wanted to bring in to work get in and not have to wait forever, things like that to make it easier. This has been an extraordinarily successful program. What they had done, and which I praised them at the time, was instead of just telling these businesses what they wanted, they asked them. And then once they asked them and got the responses, they put together the program. And so as a result, we have about 180, or one way or the other, that are currently operational here in Panama. 40% of them are European. Now, that's what came as a surprise. I hadn't realized they'd reached that level. The U.S. is number one here, and China's number two, and so forth, and those that are taking advantage of this. But number three is Switzerland, number four is the Netherlands, and Europe as a whole at 40% means that they are probably second only to the United States in that sense, if you want to look at it that viewpoint. The point here is, who cares? I don't care if they come from Timbuktu. The point is that we have a nice widespread of a lot of different companies, and Europeans are seeing Panama in a new light. And they used to not know a thing about Panama, I can assure you. They just didn't. It didn't seem important to them. Oh, things have changed. And this is there's a clear indication of that going underway. When am I going to learn to turn off my phone? Okay, sorry, a little break there. Anyhow, I don't want this to take forever. I want this to be relatively short compared to some of them. So I'm going to move ahead. I've got 2 links and 1 download to mention to you. So these are things you can, if they interest you, follow up on them. One of them is called Pro Panama. That is the program down here that was pushed very hard at the Bloomberg conference, but it's been around for a number of years, and it's been building steam. It's getting better, and it's to attract fairly sizable investments for major businesses coming in. I had mentioned to you in an earlier video that there was one for hydroponics that was going to cover 120 hectares or 300 acres, and it's a major effect. That project was created under the Agro Parks section of the Pro Panama program. So when you go, if you go in, I give you the English and the Spanish versions. It just gives you an idea of what it is that we're interested in attracting to the country, and a rough idea of why and so forth, for those who are interested in that sort of thing. Secondly, download. I had mentioned in an earlier video, horsepower to horsepower, a beautifully written and very, very well written description of a time in American history and this is interesting because there was a global conference involved, and it wasn't just Americans, how specialists, experts got together to try to decide what to do about a problem and failed to see the solution, which was already right there in front of them. But they didn't see it that way at that time. And it's an interesting story. It's worth reading. It's fun to begin with, as well as educational and easy read for anyone. So that's horsepower to horsepower. It's a link that will be in the description. And finally, for those, some of you like the interesting, unusual things that give you a little more insight than you might get elsewhere. For example, one of the problems I run into is everybody thinks that every Latin American country is pretty much like every other Latin American country, and that's not the case. Back in the Spanish days when they were in control, there may have been some sense to that maybe, but that's long gone. And as an example, Panama, as you probably know, back a little over 100 years ago, was part of Colombia. Then Teddy Roosevelt, the Americans, and the Panama Canal came on the scene, and Panama gained its independence, and so on, went on from there. But up until that point, which is not all that long ago, the Panamanians were Colombians, and they took their direction from Bogota, which is their capital, like any other Colombian city. But that changed. And since then, the histories of the two have been quite different. Obviously, the canal is a major factor here, but put that aside. The point is, what you see in this particular download is a summary, and darn well written, too, given the subject area. It can be a little too academic. I don't think it is. I think it's really very interestingly put in this summary statement, and it explains to you that why it is, or what they discovered, and why they think it's true, that in Bogota, which is the capital of Colombia, if you take an area the same size, an average area of the city, and a similar one in New York City, in Bogota, there would be 13 times more people living in that particular area than the exact same size area, same everything else, except density, in New York City. So why is Bogota 13 times more dense than New York City? That surprised me. That was the first line in the whole thing is Bogota is 13 times denser than New York City. That's caught my eye. But it goes beyond that. Even smaller cities. Bogota has over double the population of the entire Republic of Panama in its metro area. But right down to the 100,000 people level, it's very interesting to note that the density level is it's higher than Singapore. It's higher than a lot of countries, and it's just amazing how dense they are. And yet there's reason for it. And these people talk about that reason, and it's something to be kept in mind, which is why you have to know something about things like this. You have to take certain things into account, including history, above all history, when it comes to why cities are the way they are. So if you're interested in that, it's called Invisible Walls, the Hyperdensity of Colombian Cities, and there's a link to it in the right below. And that, my friends, is pretty much what I wanted to bring to your attention today. And I thank you for your patience with it. I wanted to clarify a few things, add a few things, and I plan to come back with some more specific items coming up that may be, I hope, helpful to you. So thank you very much for dropping in. I look forward to seeing you the next time.